back when I was doing my master's at Durham, I remember reading an essay by one of my tutors on the relationship between the Bible and cinema. Quote, "In referring to Jesus as a star, the apocalyptic seer of the book of Revelation may have predicted more than he intended. As we look back on a century of film, it's worth recalling the debt that the cinema owes from its dawning to the Bible and to Jesus, its leading man." You might think he's exaggerating, but he's really not. From the very beginning, so-called Jesus films have been a staple feature of Western cinema. From Robert Henderson Bland in 1912 to Joaquin Phoenix in 2018, dozens of stars have played Jesus on the big screen. But what I find really fascinating is the way in which each of these films, in their own unique way, provide an answer to Jesus' famous question in Matthew 16, "Who do you say that I am?" If you were to watch Cecil B. DeMille's 1927 film, King of Kings, for example, well, first of all, you'd need to clear 4 hours in your schedule, that's one long film, but you'd also get the impression, from the way DeMille lights his scenes to how he directs Henry Warner as Jesus, that this is indeed a supernatural figure, one that's somehow separated from the everyday realities of life. I mean, look at him, he's literally glowing. This is an otherworldly, heavenly Jesus, one that never really makes contact with the earthy realities of everyday human life. Contrast that with Pier Paolo Pasolini's Gospel According to St. Matthew, released just a few decades later, but Pasolini's Jesus is very different from DeMille's. This Jesus is a man of the people, a revolutionary figure, compassionate towards the oppressed but righteously indignant at the abuses of the establishment. By the time you reach the 70s, 2 films bring Jesus crashing into the age of disco and counterculture. David Green's Godspell and, of course, Norman Jewison's Jesus Christ Superstar. Tim Rice and Andrew Lloyd Webber famously penned the music and lyrics for Jesus Christ Superstar, and the film portrays Jesus less as God's agent of salvation and more as a victim of sociological and political factors. By the time he reaches Gethsemane, he's filled with uncertainty, and the film ends with his crucifixion, leaving open, but not certain, the prospect of resurrection. Well, if DeMille's King of Kings emphasized Jesus' divinity, then Martin Scorsese's Last Temptation most certainly focuses on his humanity. The film gets its inspiration from a single verse in the Gospel of Luke. After Jesus is tempted by Satan in Luke 4, it's said that the devil departed from him until an opportune time. In The Last Temptation, Scorsese imagines Satan returning to tempt Jesus once again on the cross, offering him a normal human life, a family, a steady job, and eventually a peaceful death in his own bed after a long life of love and comfort. Now, spoiler warning, Jesus resists Satan's last temptation, ultimately choosing crucifixion instead and the greater good of man's redemption. Of course, you also have Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ. I went to see this with a friend at the Showcase Cinemas in Stockton-on-Tees. It was massive, it was a phenomenon. Churches were paying for people to go see this film, but it also sparked a lot of debate and controversy. Where's the focus here? Not primarily on the teaching or life of Jesus. You get the occasional flashback to Jesus' ministry, but the vast majority of the film is dedicated to those final few hours of suffering, infamously receiving an 18 rating for its gratuitous depiction of the horror of crucifixion. The Passion gives cinematographic expression to a predominantly Roman Catholic tradition of meditating on the dolorous sufferings of Christ. There are so many more Jesus films, it would be impossible to go through them all here. But again, each of them, in their own way, seeks to answer Jesus' question in Matthew 16, "Who do you say that I am?" And some of them answer with, "You're a supernatural being, beyond the humdrum of human existence." Whereas others say the opposite. "You're just like us in every way, but nothing more." Some of them focus on Jesus as the victim of political and social conspiracy. Others choose to give us a suffering Jesus, one like us, who rose above the fray for the sake of the greater good. Now, here's the question you've got to ask yourself. Why do all these films exist? How is it that a no-one person from a nowhere land, at an insignificant time, though he didn't write anything, create great art, or address the Senate, or lead an army, or achieve great military victory, even though he died a criminal's death and was but one of many men who claimed to be the Messiah? How come we're talking about this guy? How come we're making dozens of films about this guy? How come we measure time itself because of this guy? How come all of Western civilization has been shaped in his wake? Now, you might say it's just an accident, a quirk of history, a fluke of circumstance. But we both know there's more to this peasant carpenter than just happenstance. So again, we return to that question: who do you say that I am? If a century of Jesus films show us anything, it's that question deserves an answer.